All right. Hello again, adventures, and welcome to another exciting episode of Daily December 2020. I'm out of jokes. I've done like 12 so far, and they're different. And they're interesting, and pick one of those. This is Daily December to the 2020 day 14. Um, so this video is actually inspired by one of my players in my newest D&D campaign. If anyone doesn't know, I currently run the three different RPGs online. Two of those are on Wednesday nights. I run them every other week. So one Wednesday will be one campaign, one Wednesday will be another one. And then the last one is every other Saturday, and then actually uses the Open Legends RPG system. The newest one is called Traversing the Veil. And it's basically about an airship crew trying to kind of eke out an existence in the elemental plane of air. Think like Firefly meets Eberron. And recently, I introduced two enemies to the group that I effectively just made two monks. They were shadow monks, so Way of the Shadow monks. And I had kind of an interesting encounter for the group. Some members of the party were less than thrilled about monks, because, as you guys know, I know monks. Monks are my favorite class. They have been my favorite class since, like, second edition. And they weren't all that great in earlier editions. Like the second edition monk was lukewarm. The third edition monk started getting a little bit more useful, but not really. Fourth edition, the monk was just bonkers and complicated, but the fifth edition monk, ooh. The fifth edition monk is the best version of the monk, hands down. And it's something like a lot of people don't play monks because they do require a better understanding of the game itself and action economy specifically to play well. And a lot of players are just not used to dealing with monks, especially dealing with enemy characters that have monk levels or monk features. So every so often, I like to introduce monks as enemies just because they're very different to deal with than most enemies. Things like Stunning Strike can really mess with a party that's not used to a creature being able to repeatedly incapacitate them every single turn if they need to. Generally, you're only going to be incapacitated either A, by going to 0 hit points, which there's a lot of ways to get out of that, or B, by having something like a hold person spell, which there's a lot of ways to get around that as well. So I had this encounter. The encounter itself was not designed to challenge them from like if you lose you die kind of encounter. I'm a huge believer in the idea that you if the only challenge you ever give your players as a DM is, well, if you fail this challenge then you die, you're not going to have an enjoyable game, because eventually D&D characters become super hard to kill, especially when they're in a party. And so the lose condition cannot always be you're dead. What the lose condition was in this particular instance, which they found out at the end, is the monks were literally just wasting their time. They were buying time so that someone, they don't know who, it might have been one of the monks, it might not have been, they lost track of one of the monks while they were fighting, went back and kidnapped their cargo, the person they were transporting. So that was the quote-unquote lose condition. So despite the fact that the party themselves, technically you would think, won the encounter because they forced the monk to run away, they did activate the lose condition where they lost their cargo, and they're going to have to deal with that this Wednesday. So as kind of a joke, kind of not, one of my players posted in the Discord channel I have set up just for that group so they can talk to each other and have fun. They posted this the thing where it's a screenshot of a video that says how to kill a monk. And the specific video is done by a group called the Homebrew Crew. They're a little bit bigger than me, and by a little bit, I mean they have 5,000 subscribers instead of 342. This is definitely me kind of punching up. But I watched the video because I'm always interested to see how people that aren't super good with monks and don't know them as well as I do, how they react to some of the stuff that I affectionately refer to as crazy monk shit. And I've used that phrase many times when I was in the when I used to play the Adventures League. I would do something crazy, and then the DM would just look at me because I just described something that was impossible, and I would just go crazy monk shit, and they go, oh, crazy monk shit, and that was generally all I needed to do because I knew this class really well. So yeah, I've gone and I've watched the entire video, and now I'm going to teach you how to avoid being killed as a monk when the DM is trying to kill a monk. So this is literally a response to a video that's over a year old that one of my players found just as a little dig at one of my players, because we've known each other a remarkably long time, and we like to take little jabs at each other. So Imp, this is how all of those things are completely useless when you know how to play a monk. So the first thing they say is use flying creatures. This is actually a good technique in general if you want to challenge a D&D party just ever. Is start using flying creatures, because invariably you're going to have at least one or two players that are primarily melee fighters, or they are strongest when they're in melee. Barbarians fit into that. Monks tend to be more melee. A lot of their abilities require melee attacks. Again, depending on your flavor of monk. Paladins are melee. So there's quite a few classes that really rely on getting close, and using flying monsters is a great way to force them to rethink their tactics. It is not a great way to create encounters that they can't win. The thing with flying creatures, first of all, the flying creature has to have ranged attacks, which is great. Ranged attacks, specifically for monks, not as effective as you might think, because they can deflect arrows, which is a reaction they can use once per turn, where they literally grab it out of the sky, and then if they burn a key point, they get to throw it back using their martial arts to die. So some of the things these guys to talk about is monks are not ranged characters, and they're really not. They're not built to be ranged characters. Or at least some aren't. There are flavors that we will talk about in a little bit that are. So forcing them to fight at range, they can't do stunning strike at range, which is a defining aspect of the monk. It's how they do most of their action economy control, and that could be really, really devastating. However, monks have a lot of other things in their disposal. Like I said, they can deflect missiles. So anything that is a missile, not like a spell or something, they can throw right back at you, doing a fair amount of damage. In addition to that, they can just make it really hard to hit them. They can take the dodge action. This is an action that a lot of players don't ever use because they think that it's wasting their turn because they're using their action instead of to make attacks or do damage or just do something. They're using their action to do nothing except give all the attacks against them disadvantage, which, due to the fact that monks already can have a remarkably high AC, especially if they start getting magic items like Bracers of Defense, Ionian Stone of Protection, Cloak of Defense, stuff like that, they can become remarkably difficult. So yeah, you can have a bunch of flying creatures and make it remarkably difficult to hit them. You're not going to stop a monk with that. Now, in addition to the fact that monks in general are actually really good at defending against ranged attacks, the other issue with flying creatures and ranged attacks in general is they require line of sight. And this is something a lot of players won't think about when they're playing a game, is when the DM presents an encounter, in general, they've created the encounter for the enemy to have the advantage unless the players have done something like ambush them or really work to ensure that the battle happens where the players want it and not the DM, which I really, really encourage. The best way to avoid being put in really bad situations is play very tactfully. Play with the tactics. And do everything you can to get as much knowledge as you can before combat starts. However, just because you started in a certain place doesn't mean you have to stay there. If the enemy is too far away from you to hit, make them come to you. Again, I play a Shadow Monk. The easiest way to do this is the Darkness spell. Darkness stops line of sight. You cannot make attacks against a creature that you don't have line of sight on. You can attempt to wildly, hopefully hit, but there's a large difference between making a melee attack against a target that you can't see and a ranged attack against a target that you can't see, especially when you can't see in a very large area. There are two different ways to use the darkness spell against a flying enemy. Darkness is cast on an object, not an area. So you do need something to cast it on. If if you're in an enclosed environment like a room or something like that, casting darkness on a point on this is a ceiling, a stalactite, anything like that, to where the darkness envelops the creature itself, is the best thing. Excuse me. Darkness is a 20-foot radius sphere. So end to end, this is 40 feet into the diameter of darkness that no one can see through without true sight or something like that. So you don't even have to get that close to it. You just need to be able to cast darkness within 20 feet of the creature, because then it will be enveloped in the darkness. By doing that, you blind them and make it so that they can't make ranged attacks because they can't see. They have no way to make range, and that includes spell attacks, anything like that. Again, they can blindly fire into nothingness. But as long as you move after you make the darkness spell work, there's really not a whole lot they can do. Now, if they are just in open air and you can't cast it in a place where you can do it, cast it on the ground and move into it. Again, it is a 40-foot in diameter area. You can simply run around in there until they get bored. And either come in close or run away. Never forget, you don't actually have to kill all the bad guys. As long as the combat ends and you're still alive and you didn't trigger the loss condition, you're pretty good. So if you get it to the point where they can't do anything to you specifically, and then combine that with the fact that you have allies that probably have ranged attacks, yeah, that's pretty useful. The other final thing about flying enemies is they can fall. Again, as a shadow monk, you can teleport 60 feet using a bonus action, as long as there's dim light or darkness. So as long as you are not in basically direct sunlight, you can teleport right next to them and then punch them as you fall. If you get a stun off on any of those punches, they will fall with you, but you have the slow fall ability where you can reduce basically all the damage to 0. They do not, and they will take fall damage. Now, if you're not a shadow monk, there are other ways to get that fall damage. Elemental monks are by far the best range attackers because they just have all these spells that they can use, including things like Hold Person, which paralyzes the creature. Other things like Water Whip, where you can actually get to attack it. Fangs of the Fire Snake will give you range things. The Sun Soul monk is a ranged monk, so they can do a lot of good things. The Kensei, one of your Kensei weapons when you first get the subclass at the third level, has to be a ranged weapon. So that one works perfectly fine. In addition, and they mentioned this, starting at level 9, monks can run on vertical surfaces, and they can jump. Step of the Wind increases your jump distance by a ton. So even if you don't have the ability to fly or anything like that, elemental monks can cast the fly spell on themselves. So, so even if you don't have the ability to fly in some way, you can literally just Step of the Wind and jump to hit them a lot of times. And your focus needs to be on getting them grounded. If they're a spellcaster, they're using the fly spell, just hit them as many times as you can. They will eventually fail it and fall. If they're just a flying creature, stuns, Hold Person, anything that can incapacitate them can knock them to the ground. So yeah, flying creatures, not all that dangerous. And then absolute, if you have nothing else, leave the area. Go to an area that makes it more difficult to fly. Go to a heavily wooded area where you constantly have cover against them. Go indoors where they can't fly. You know, make them come to you. You don't have to fight on their terms. So yeah, flying, not a horrible idea. Not as effective as you would think. Their next thing is use direct magic spells. This is specifically because at later levels, monks actually get proficiency in all saving throws. In addition to that, if they fail a saving throw, they can burn a key point to succeed on the saving throw in stead. So, and then could combine that with the fact that they get evasion, which means dexterity-based saving throws that they make against things that'll hurt them, like a fireball makes you make a dex save. Monks and rogues as well. It's traditionally it's actually a rogue ability, and monks just get it later on. Monks can, if they save, they take 0 damage. If they fail to save, they take a half damage. So any dexterity-based saving throw spell that lets you save for half damage, if the monk saves, they take no damage. Which makes them very, very difficult to hit with a lot of magic, because a lot of magic spells use dex saves. It's one of the reasons it's such a useful ability. So they say use direct magic spells, specifically spells that have you making attack rolls instead of that, or spells that auto hit, like magic missiles, things like that. This is a pretty good suggestion, and not just if you're facing, if your players are having monks in their party. Like I said, rogues get this. One of the rangers subclass gets this at higher levels. Evasion is a massively useful skill. So, relying entirely on saving throw style spells can become pretty difficult. So mixing it up with some attack roll based spells can be really useful. Again, any spell that requires an attack roll requires a line of sight. You can't shoot at something you can't see. So the darkness spell is still really, really useful. I believe I'd have to look again. I believe there is a new feat in Xanathar's that actually gives you access to the darkness spell. You can just take it as a feat. I may be 100% wrong on that, so I'm actually going to look it up. Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Feat. All right. Yes, I think it's Shadow to touch. Let me, there we go. Oh no! It's the invisibility spell. Still remarkably useful. I don't think Fey Touch gives me what I want. No, Fey Touch gives you Misty Step. However, the invisibility... We'll try this again. The invisibility spell is the same basic principle, which is you turn invisible, which high-level monks get an ability to turn invisible at will. And it's technically a version, an even better version of greater invisibility, because it doesn't end if you make an attack or something like that, and it gives you resistance to everything. So everything but force. So if your monk is not built to create the things that will block line of sight, again, elemental monks get a lot of different things that can create, like walls of fire or stone shapes, stuff like that. The Shadow Monk gets the darkness spell. I think Sun Soul monks get the ability to blind. I'd have to look again, even if they don't. You know, any ability that gives you the ability to blind an opponent will make their direct magic attacks, like they're talking here, completely useless, because they no longer have a little line of sight. And along these same routes, if you don't have access to any of those spells, and neither does the rest of your party, which is where party makeup comes in, you simply have to take the situation to another place where they no longer have the advantage. Again, going to a heavily wooded area where you can constantly break line of sight until they get close to you works pretty well. If you have to take one or two spells to the face in order to get close enough to start stun locking them, then that's what you need to do. Going indoors is super useful because you can go to another room and close the door. You get to interact with an object once as a free action. So forcing them to come up to you instead of casting spells from afar can have the same effect. And constantly having things that break line of sight can do that too. Things like the fog spell can be super useful. Destroying parts of the environment to create cover. Cover is a really useful thing. Again, if you can get to the 3/4 cover, you increase your armor class by 5, which for a monk that already has a lot of things that give it a decent armor class and make it really hard to hit. Yeah, you can do some pretty impressive things. So direct magic spells, yeah, they're not bad. They're not going to stop a monk that knows what they're doing. And this does really give credence to the fact that the elemental monk is not nearly as useless as a lot of people think it is, because the sheer versatility they can have, depending on the things that they use, makes them really effective at control, a control-based monk. If you focus only on their damage potential, yeah, elemental monks are really underpowered. But if you focus on the fact that you can use them to control the environment, they are super powerful. So the next one they talk about is intelligence and charisma saving throws. They specifically mention this because monks in general are going to have a high dexterity score because that's what they use to attack. They're going to have a high wisdom score because that's what they use for all of their saves, including their stunning strikes save, which is super important. And both of those stats contribute to their AC. And because they can't wear armor to use the majority of their abilities, they have to rely on those two stats to have an armor class high enough if they're not constantly being hit. As someone that played a monk at lower levels, you get the snot beat out of you if you're not playing correctly. And I would faint. I'd be reduced to 0 hit points constantly before I figured out how to play the monk effectively. Because I would always run into the middle of a battle and then try and punch everything and be cool monk shit. And I would just die every single time. So because of that, they're going to neglect other stats. Generally, their intelligence and charisma are going to be a bit lower. So using intelligence-based saving throws on the spells you cast are going to be really useful. The same is true of charisma-based. The issue with those being intelligence-based spells are generally going to do psychic damage, but they're incredibly rare. So having to build monsters specifically around using intelligence-based attacks is possible. Tasha's makes it a little bit easier because they add all the psionic spells, but it's not going to be great. Charisma-based spells in general are charm spells. Monks get unique features where when they get to I gotta remember which one it is. I have to look. They get an ability that lets them effectively just end controlling the things against them. Stillness of Mind. It's a level 7 ability, so it's not even that high. You can use your action to end one effect on yourself, causing you to be charmed or frightened. Those are the two big things that tend to be charisma saving throws. So starting from level 7, they may be charmed for until their turn starts, but once their turn gets around, they just burn their action, and they're no longer charmed. And monks are a heavily bonus action focused class. So they will have things to do with their bonus action. Now, things like Flurry of Blows requires you to use your action to make the attack action. So you stop them from using Flurry of Blows for that round. But using a spell slot to basically just force them to waste their action is not a good way to use this as a spell slot. The nice thing about that is it's not a key point based ability. That is just whenever I want to, I get to not be charmed or frightened. So yes, if you want to use into intelligence or charisma-based attacks, they're extremely limited. You'll have to know the spellbook really well. And all of that can be fixed by a bard, sorcerer, wizard, arcana domain cleric, warlock that has counterspell. Again, if you are fighting alone as a monk, you're doing it wrong. You always should be with your team, and you should be thinking about how to play how your play style is going to help your team entirely. More so than most other classes, the monk is a team-based class because they don't do tons of the damage. They're not designed to. Though if you build them correctly, you can really slay. Quivering Palm is deadly. It's only 3 key points too. It's amazing. That's something where you should be relying on your team, or just like anything else, break line of sight. They can't cast spells on you if they can't see you. So it's good. That's actually a good suggestion for DMs in general. Is every so often go away from dex-based spell attacks, because it will cause your party, cause your players to have to rethink their strategy, and that's a good thing. You don't want them to ever get into this habit of, first round of combat I do this, second round of combat I do this every single time, because it's boring. It means combat encounters really aren't something that is going to challenge them anymore, and you don't want that. So it's a good suggestion. It's not going to stop a monk. The next thing that they say are damage shields spells. And this one I find particularly interesting, because there's really not many of them. They specifically list a fire shield and Shadow of Moil. So basically, fire shield is anytime you get hit with a melee attack, they will take fire damage. Shadow of Moil, which is a warlock exclusive ability, it's a level 4 spell. Effectively makes you weaponize to the darkness. It gets dark around you, and you have this shadow to the tentacle. That anything that attacks you within to the 10 feet will take 2d8 necrotic damage every time they hit you. This is a really smart thing to do for melee classes in general. However, those spells are just extremely limited. Shadow of Moil is a concentration spell, meaning if they get incapacitated, like through a stunning strike, you're only taking that damage once. And then you stun them. Incapacitation cancels concentration spells, and it's over. Fire Shield's significantly more useful. It's not a concentration spell. It lasts until until the spell ends, I believe. I'm going to check it out just to remind myself. It just does extra damage. However, the creature has to be within 5 feet of you when they make the attack. So anything that gives you reach will void that out. And while again, there's really not a whole lot of weapons that have the reach property that also happen to be monk weapons. Monks have a lot of other ways to get reach. Again, we did talk about the elemental monks. Their Fist of the Fire Stake gives them that. They also have a bunch of ranged attacks. Kensei, again, one of their weapons is ranged. I'm totally drawing blank. The Sun Soul Monk has tons of ranged abilities, and monks in general can throw things. Darts tend to be pretty popular. If you can afford it, keeping a bunch of daggers on you for throwing. Daggers count as a monk weapon. So you get to use your martial arts to die with them. You can throw them from range, doing a fair amount of damage. And there are a lot of different ways to get around something like that. And then again, if you have a party, doing things like dispel magic will end this as a spell. Again, if using Shadow of Moil, they just have to throw daggers or darts at you until until you fail your concentration check, and then they can come up and start punching you again. Or again, they can just go up and stun you or punch you until it goes off. It's really not going to be that effective. The one, like I said, the one real difference is going to be the fire shield, and it's incredibly limited in the fact that they have to be within 5 feet. So as long as they can get a reach weapon, even if that reach weapon is not something they're proficient in, maybe, as long as they can hit you with it, they're going to be fine. And not really going to have to worry about too much. And like I said, all that goes to the wayside if you have a Kensei monk, because literally any monk or any weapon can be their monk weapon. So they can have a reach weapon that is a monk weapon, and then do all of their awesome stuff. And because they are melee weapon attacks with monk weapons, they'll still be able to stun from range as well. Yeah. It's a good idea. I think a lot of DMs do not use shield spells and things like that. Specifically, Fire Shield is a super useful spell. My Blade Singer, that's one of the spells they have, because it's not concentration, and it means they can get right up and close with enemies. And if the enemy does try and attack and actually hits, they're going to take the damage anyway. So it's really useful. So that's that. The next one they say are terrain spells, making difficult terrain. This is specifically to counter the fact that monks at high levels eventually get 60 feet of movement per turn. I mentioned this before. Monks are hyper mobile. They're generally going to be able to outrun any other class other than barbarians. So trying to remove that is really useful. And they specifically list this as spike growth. Because what happens is spike growth, for every 5 feet of movement you take in an area that has this spike growth on it, you will take 2d4 damage. So if you can get a large enough area of spike growth, that the monk has to travel through, 60 divided by 5 is going to be 12 squares. So 24d4 damage. Even though it's d4s, that's a lot of damage. So yeah, that sounds like something good, because it's taking a huge asset of the monk, their speed, and turning it into a hindrance. The issue with that being is monks are hyper mobile. So The spike growth spell specifically. And I'm gonna look it up here so I don't say the wrong things. It helps if I actually spell it right. Spike growth. It's only a second level spell, which is nice. So it's a 20-foot radius centered on a point within range. So total, this is a 40-foot in diameter circle of effectively. Monks can go around that. So again, their hypermobility means they can run around it. They can run on walls. So if it specifically says the ground in a 20-foot radius, so this won't affect walls. So literally, if you're in a room where you've just made the entire room spikes, the monk will just run along the walls to get to you. It's a concentration spell, so they can incapacitate you and it all goes away. In addition to that, the monk has this really cool thing called Step of the Wind. It's a bonus action, which allows them to take the disengage or it allows them to take the disengage or dash action as a bonus action, and then your jump distance is doubled for that turn. So you can jump with double jump distance. Jumping is a strength-based roll, so they're generally not going to have great strength. But you can jump over large portions of it and then just not move. So yes, terrain-based spells are somewhat useful, but they're all concentration. So throwing stuff or shooting them, again, Sun Soul monks are ranged monks. Elemental monks can drag them through their own spike growth, which I've seen players do that, and I don't think there's a specific rule that states the spike growth spell itself specifically says when a creature moves into it or within the area, it takes 2d4 piercing damage for every 5 feet it travels. It does not mention anything about voluntary movement. It just has to move in there. So elemental monk can literally just drag them through their own spikes, and every time they move 5 feet, that is a new concentration check. In addition to the fact that they're just taking tons of damage. So, terrain spells, really useful to, again, challenge your players, make them think a little bit differently. It's not going to stop a monk. And then they had some extra tips. Their first extra tip is choose high constitution monsters. I'm going to give you guys an extra tip. Choose giants. All giants have high constitution scores. A lot of them have higher than 20 con scores. Most of them are proficient in most of them are proficient in Constitution saving throws. Giants are a pain to stun with stunning strike. So if you want to counter stunning strike, make them fight giants. It's really simple. And if stunning strike was the only thing that monks had in their Arenzel, that would be really devastating. Because when a creature has a +10 to their Constitution save, or a +12 or something like that, it effectively means even with max wisdom, they have to roll like a 6 or 7 to actually fail their stunning strike. And there are better things to use your key on than trying to hopefully get them to eventually fail a stunning strike. So yeah, that's really useful. That's not the only thing monks do. Patient defense is massively useful because it gives them disadvantage on their attack rolls, which if they can't hit you, there's not a whole lot they can do. Again, going to the elemental monk, creating terrain so that they can't get near you can be really, really useful, because then the rest of the party can just use ranged attacks, and you can too as an elemental monk to burn them down before they can get close enough to you. Now, a lot of giants have things like picking up a rock and throwing it. But again, monks have deflect missile, and there's nothing more badass than a monk deflecting a boulder. If your DM wants to argue that it's not possible because this is too big or anything like that, because it's a key-based ability, they're supposed to be able to do crazy, impossible things. That's why a lot of their skills allow them to move creatures, like the Way of the Open Hand, doesn't actually have a size limit on open hand technique, which is basically anytime you hit them with a flurry of blow strike, you can you can add an additional effect. One of those is they make a strength save. If they fail it, you can push them up to 15 feet. They can be a gargantuan monster, and you can still push them 15 feet away from you at level 3 using open hand technique. It's part of how the class was designed, is they should be able to do stuff that's like, wait a minute. They specifically word it so that they can do wait a minute kind of stuff. That's why I say crazy monk shit. So yes, high constitution monsters, if a monk specifically is relying too much on their stunning strike, yes, start throwing giants at them. So start throwing high con monsters. Start throwing legendary creatures that have legendary saves, so that they have to burn through a bunch of key points in order for it to ever stick. Those are all useful things. However, someone that really knows how to play a monk well is going to understand that Stunning Strike is not the only tool in their toolbox. And if you take away one tool, they're just going to use the other ones. And that's how they should play. Again, and this is true for every class, if they get to the point where every single combat they do the exact same thing, then you need to change up combat, because it's getting boring for everyone. If you have, like one of the ones I ran into for a while is one of my players. He was a cleric. He got the banishment spell, and every single game, every single combat would start with the exact same thing. I banish half the bad guys. And then the action economy is massively changed, because you've just taken a bunch of actions away, and they would breeze through. So I started throwing enemies with counterspell in, and throwing enemies that had I think it's the Wizard Slayer feat. Effectively, if you get hit by someone with this feat, you make your concentration check with disadvantage, because banishment is a concentration spell. So yeah, if you have players that are relying on certain abilities just too much, change things up. Make those abilities not work. Create living armor that are specifically immune to the banishment spell. That's part of the living armor stat block, is they get to be immune to 3 spells, one of which is lightning bolt normally. So do that. Come up with a reason for the characters, for the creatures to be immune to the banishment spell. Because if you're randomly making creatures immune to spells, it feels like you're cheating as the DM. But if you come up with a reason for why those creatures would be immune to that spell, and the reason might be, the banishment spell is an extremely popular spell in this world, and it's used all the time. So mages that create constructs into things like that developed a way to make their constructs immune to spells. Or perhaps it's just, oh yeah, we have a non-banishment ring. It's a magic item that makes you immune to the banishment spell, very similar to a ring of mind shielding, where you can't be, they can't read your thoughts. You'd have a ring of planar anchor, a ring of the planar anchor, which just makes it impossible for you to be banished to another plane of existence, which is how the banishment spell works. So stuff like that makes sense. If you've ever read the Dune series, the shields that they use are exactly an explanation as to why directed energy weapons aren't a thing in this world. This is the future. Why aren't they using phasers and laser guns and something like that? Well, they do exist. They're called las guns. And if a las gun interacts with a personal shield, which everybody wears, it causes a nuclear explosion, or the equivalent of a nuke going off. So people don't generally use them because it ends up, if you're close enough to shoot them with it, you're going to die. The personal shields are the same reason why there's not a ton of projectile weapons as well, because the shields themselves stop anything moving at a fast speed. It's why in the opening parts of the book, Paul is training with, I can't remember if it's Duncan or the other one. I can't remember. But he's training with the weapons master. And they teach you that when you're fighting, any quick strike will be deflected by the shield. So what happens is you move very, very quickly to get your opponent off balance, and then to do the final kill, you move very, very slowly at the last second, right when it would normally impact the shield. So you move very, very quick, and then slowly move in, so the shield doesn't activate. That is an entire in-world explanation for how they use swords in space. Literally, that's all it is. So creating things, if you have players that are just abusing a certain spell, a certain ability, you can create things in the world that are explained by, everybody uses that because it's an extremely powerful ability, like the banishment spell. So they came up with ways to combat that, because in open warfare, if your opponent can just banish half of your group, or you can banish the one that banished them, then it wouldn't make sense. Does it trivialize the ability? Yes and no. It forces them to think a little bit differently. If it's a magic item that does it, creating an anti-magic field or just going up and removing the item from them becomes much more important, and it forces them to rely on other things if they want to use that spell or ability. So, yes, high-con monsters are great if a monk is relying too much on stunning strikes. However, monks have a lot of other things, so high-con monsters are not going to stop a monk. The next one. Stack the deck with limited rests. This is specifically talking about how the key points for a monk refresh on a short rest, and they're a limited supply. So don't allow your monks to get short rests, or don't allow them to get many short rests. This is actually true in general if you are just running D&D. Is control the number of rests the players get. And it doesn't mean creating a rule which says, well, you can only have a short rest once per session, because that just feels like the DM is imposing arbitrary rules to make things more difficult. And that's not fun. That's basically the DM cheating. I'm changing the rules to make it harder on you guys and easier on me. It's not being a good DM. However, a short rest takes an hour. A long rest takes 8 hours. Remember how much can happen in an hour. A single round of combat is 6 seconds, which means a minute of combat is 10 rounds. 60 minutes is 6 600 rounds. So, if your players decide that, well, we're going to take a short rest, imagine what the enemy can do in 600 rounds. How many traps can they set up? How many more allies can they bring in? What else can happen in the world? What can happen in an hour? Can the weather change in an hour? Can decisions be made somewhere completely different that will affect what's happening? Time limits are a thing, and I don't mean having a clock that you go, oh, you have 5 minutes left. Oh, you have the 3 minutes left. I mean, if they're in the middle of a dungeon, they decide to sit down and take an hour for lunch. There's very little chance that they're not going to be discovered sometime in that hour. And part of that can be if you throw monsters at them before they get their hour rest, it doesn't count as a short rest. So that was something that they did in earlier versions of D&D, and especially in D&D computer games, is whenever you would take a rest, you would roll. For generally every hour you were resting, and short rests weren't really a thing in like third and second edition. Not like they are in fifth edition, at least, where a lot of abilities are recharged on short rests. You would roll, and if you rolled, generally it was a 19 or to 20, you would have a random encounter. If you had a random encounter anytime during your rest, the rest didn't count, and you didn't regain any hit points. You didn't get any spells back. And that's how they dealt with people abusing rests before. You can still do that in 5th edition, and it will work to a point. Eventually, the players will start getting crafty. They will start doing things like sealing themselves in a place where they can't be bothered. Things like using the hut that I can't remember what it's called, using spells that put them in a pocket dimension or stuff like that. There's a lot of different ways where they can get a long rest without anyone being able to interrupt them at all. Even something as simple as barring the door or using stone shape to literally cut off the passage so that no one can get in or out. Like there's a lot of different ways that they can make it so you can't harass them with monsters. And smart parties will learn this very quickly. However, time is still passing. If they've gone anywhere in a dungeon and they've killed people, the bodies will be discovered in an hour. Easily. Unless they take really good efforts to hide it. And then the bodies may not be discovered, but the fact that these people just disappeared will make them think, shoot, someone's here. In 8 hours, they will be discovered. Always. They will always be discovered in 8 hours. You cannot hide yourself in a dungeon for 8 hours, especially if you've already started doing stuff in the dungeon, like killing monsters and opening chests and things like that. Someone will wander around looking for a sandwich to find them. So yes, in general, limiting the amount of rest they can do is something you should be doing not just for monks, but for any group. This is not going to stop a monk, though. If you are playing a monk, you should understand how to use your ki effectively. I've already mentioned before, wasting all your ki trying to stun a giant is pointless because you are just wasting the ki, and there are better ways to suspend it. If you're doing a dungeon delve where there's a good chance you're not going to be able to get your short rests, be stingy with your ki. Again, there are so many things a monk can do that don't require ki. And this is where the elemental monk becomes really, really handicapped because they are massively reliant on ki. Most of their abilities require you to use ki. Some of them use a relatively small amount of ki, but you're still burning through ki to do anything with your subclass in that. So that's where they really start to hurt, is if you're not able to get your ki back. But you're just a regular monk. They can make 3 attacks per turn, which is already good. They have deflect missiles. They have slow fall. They can run along walls. They're hyper mobile. None of these require ki. Deflect missiles only requires ki if you're throwing it back. If you add in feats that don't require expending resources, things like the mobile feats gives them additional speed, which is good. And anytime they make an attack against an enemy, they don't have to hit. That enemy cannot make opportunity attacks against them. So they can literally, using their souped up speed, go in, punch a bunch of guys without burning any ki, and then run back out before they can hurt the monk, making them really good hit and run kind of enemies. They can get to places other creatures can't, so they can run down, punch a few times, and then run up a wall to a higher point where they can just stand. You know, maybe they're on a pillar or something like that, and will require the enemy to do ranged attacks that they can deflect. All these things don't require ki points. The defensive duelist feat gives you the ability to parry as long as you have a finesse weapon in one hand, which is really easy. My monk goes around with a dagger that I call a sai because it's cooler. And he just, he always has that in one hand. He has the other hand open for any deflect missiles or open hand techniques he needs to do. As a reaction, he gets to add his proficiency bonus to his AC. That's really useful. At high levels, it's a +5 or a +6 to AC every turn, as is reaction. So yes, it does make sense to limit rests that the party can have, just in general. That's what you should be doing as a DM. And if you're not, either your players are not taking advantage of it, which could be a good or a bad thing. They may be thinking the same mindset of, well, yeah, if we take an hour or long rest, we'll get some stuff back, but they'll have an hour to prepare for us. Maybe we don't want to do that. It means they're just a smart party. But yeah, you should always be, making rests a limited feature. And that's what they did. Again, there's nothing wrong with this video. The video was designed to counter specific things about monks, because these guys hadn't dealt with monks before. And when you haven't dealt with them, they can get really confusing. The monk class is why I started D&D Deep Dive. It was the monk and the druid, because they're much more complicated than the rest of the classes as far as playing them well. Yeah, I totally understand this. However, Imp, if you think using these suggestions are going to make it so you can hurt my monk characters that you invariably face later on the campaign, is not gonna work. Monks have a lot more tools at their disposal than just the things that they have talked about here. And when you have someone that knows monks really well, like well enough that they've created an entire series that has over 80 videos on your YouTube, and has been going on for multiple years, yeah, they're going to find ways around this. This is not me discouraging people from fighting differently depending on the enemies that you're facing. You should be doing that. That's part of the challenge of D&D. However, there is no auto win in D&D 5th edition. There's no ability, there's no technique, there's no skill. There's no plan that will always be beneficial to you every single time in every situation. So the absolute best advice I can give to anyone that is coming up in a D&D game or any RPG, and they're having issues with certain aspects of enemies or encounter design or anything, is understand that your favorite thing to do doesn't mean it's the only thing to do. Get creative. That's the whole point of tabletop RPGs. You are not limited by the computer only having a set number of solutions to a problem. The solution to problems in general into the tabletop RPGs is infinite. However you wanted to do it, get creative. Understand how abilities work and understand how they don't work. And use that to your advantage. But there is no quick fix. And if you're playing in one of my games, I'm going to constantly challenge you. Because I don't want you to become complacent, and I don't want the game to become boring. I want you to be thinking outside of the box. I want you to be doing things where I go, wow, I never thought of that. That's a really interesting way to deal with that. I want every so often to go, whoa, that is a really, really broken combo, and I'm going to have to fix that either with a house rule or a ruling or something, because that's massively broken. I want you guys to bring that stuff up to me. Because first of all, it helps make the game more balanced, and second of all, it means that you're having fun and being creative. So, yeah. This has been a really, really long Daily December, but I love it to challenge. So yeah, Imp, if you think this is going to stop those monks, get ready for learning brand new things about how monks work. And for everyone else, specifically the homebrew crew, if you guys actually will watch this, what are you doing with your little lives? You have much better things to do than watch a weird dude critique your really well done video. But if you're watching this, I'd love to collab sometime. Shoot me a message on Twitter or comment here. I'm Trainer Jody everywhere, so let's collab, dude. We could have fun. Or dudes. Or crew, whatever group pronoun you decide you like. But yeah, that's all for me today. I will see you guys tomorrow with another Daily December. Bye-bye.